To Green. Thank you very much. Sorry, 1 second. Thank you.
March 21st, marking the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I just want to speak to how proud I am of the work that is ongoing in our community. This past weekend, I attended the annual Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination hosted by the Area Steel Council under the leadership of Darren Green in partnership with CCAR, in partnership with the Sikh community who is here, MISCA, and of course ACA and our African Canadian communities. We came together, as we do every year, to recognize the need for us to continue to organize on this issue. But I have to reiterate the history of the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is observed annually on March 21st, because on that day in 1960, police opened fire on peaceful protesters in Sharpeville, South Africa, against an apartheid law called the Pass Laws. Under apartheid, members of townships in the black community, the African community in South Africa, were restricted from their ability to travel freely without being harassed by the police and having to present their papers. And I bring that distinction here today as a reminder that these systems of targeted oppression are still in place. And I will say specifically the correlation between the racist policy of street checks and carding, which are the targeted harassment of people of color and indigenous communities, as identified by police reports ongoing. So much as so to say that last night we hosted Justice Michael Tulloch in an independent street checks review. Why do I say that? Because our young Indigenous brother who is here today outlined that the failures are not merely legislative failures, they are cultural, civil, and societal failures that allow for this type of hatred to ferment, to take hold. And if I could for a moment be personal and share with you that it was in 4th grade that I first recall being called the N-word. N-I-G-G-E-R. At 9 years old, I was forced to face the reality of Canadian-born racism as I played in the schoolyard during recess with my classmates. Classmates that I grew up with, that I played road hockey with, and that I hung around with. And it wasn't a schoolyard bully who threw the first punch. It was a kid that I would have otherwise considered one of my friends. It was also the first time that I discovered that my fight was much stronger than my flight. And I knew that being as one of the only kids of color growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, I'd either learn to stand tall and defend myself or face a life of isolation as a victim. I remember the pain, the fear, and the rush of anger that uncontrolled would lead me into my first fist fight. It was also the first time that I faced an in-school suspension. The violence of a racist remark, and yes, hate speech is violence, was left undisciplined, but my own physical reaction and defense took on the bulk of the school system's punishment. And I was only 12 years old when I came face to face for the first time with neo-Nazis in my city. Walking through the mall across the street at Jackson Square, I was approached by 2 skinheads who had taunt me once again with that N-word, N-I-G-G-E-R. These were grown men. To this day, I remember the uniformity of their paramilitary outfits, complete with Doc Marten boots and white laces, white t-shirts and red suspenders, with their black bomber jackets embroidered with swastikas and Confederate flags. It was my older brother who stepped in for my defense and was jumped by these 2 white supremacists. And at 16, he did the best that a teenager can do in fending off these 2 hate-filled men. And I remember being angry at the crowd of onlookers who gathered to watch but did nothing. But I learned that day from my brother, we must never be bystanders to bigotry. that we must all have the courage to not only fight for ourselves, but to find the courage to step in and fight for others, knowing that the pain of fighting for justice is temporary compared to the hurt of simply standing by and doing nothing at all. And that's why we are here today on March 21st, some decades after the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, continuing to fight for the rights and freedoms of our racialized communities, and continuing to have the courage to stand up against the violent forms of white supremacy that exist in our communities today. I would like to acknowledge the work of all the community members ongoing, including labor, our social justice and racial justice groups, our environmental groups that come out in coalitions. But it's not enough. We must continue as a government and as a council to denounce this. I'm proud to say that it is through the work of this council and the decades-long work of our Committee Against Racism that we now see in our chambers Prince Will Ogban, who is the anti-racism lead, we are referring this item to. I have faith in this council, I have faith in this center and his leadership, and I have faith of all of the committee coalitions that continue this fight against racial discrimination and bigotry in the city. And so I share this experience with you so that for those that might be watching who say, why is it that we're always talking about this issue? We continue to talk about this issue because it continues to be a problem in our community. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.